Well, like I said, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a while. We used to do these every week, and now we just do them once a month, and I kind of miss y'all when it's the off weeks. But I don't, there comes a time where there's not a lot of news, and a lot of you have heard me say, like, there's no need to be hyper attentive to the news. It is more of a detriment than a help oftentimes when we're glued to the news. It just doesn't come that quickly and can make us anxious. So, but I think, you know, obviously there's been a lot of change since we chatted last related to just COVID prevalence and what we find ourselves experiencing out and about over the holidays, and then of course with the vaccines coming online. So I mostly wanted to chat about vaccines, because I know it's a big topic and there's a lot of varying opinions. I guess I'll just start out with my general impression, kind of high level overview, is both that I am very pro COVID vaccine and equally empathetic to the anxiety that it provokes. And so I think everyone is well served by, just really kind of taking a deep breath and examining, our feelings of maybe why we're excited about the vaccine, what does that mean for us, as far as how that will change our life and habits, as well as if we find ourselves being hesitant to take the vaccine, why that might be. And vaccination may not be necessary for, we know it's not necessary for every single person, but there are rare circumstances where I would recommend, quite frankly, that someone not get the vaccine. So, just a little kind of high level overview of where we stand as of what is public knowledge this morning. We still have just the two vaccines on the market, Pfizer and Moderna. They both use the same technology, which is the vaccine injects us mRNA, which then signals our body to produce what's called the spike protein. The spike protein is very unique to COVID-19, but as it turns out, we think is not so unique to particular strains of COVID-19 that it makes the vaccine ineffective among strains. So there's been a lot of talk here just in recent days that, hey, these variations and viruses in the virus, and it makes the news, and a lot of physicians are kind of like, yeah, that's always the case, and it's always happened. In fact, the predominant strain back in spring, the predominant strains in New York were not even the same strains that were in Washington and California back in spring. So we know there's a lot of variation, and I'll kind of get ahead of myself a little bit, but this new strain that's making the news a little bit right now is doing so because it does seem to have increased the infectiousness of the virus, the ability with which the virus can spread, but it doesn't seem to have increased the severity, which I sometimes, by definition, can be a very big picture person, like big picture first and then hone down. And so when I hear that, I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like a virus is even though it's not smart, it is very smart. And if it's going to mutate, it's going to mutate in a way that makes it have an increased ability to spread. That's what it wants to do. It wants to find more homes. But it's actually less likely to mutate in a way that kills its host. And so, because then it's like, okay, well, I don't necessarily want to go burn down this home I just found. So that kind of makes sense in the kind of general big picture. What hasn't been fully tested, but what we think is that even that new strain, while it might make the virus spread more quickly, does the vaccine, we would not expect it to be ineffective for that strain. So that's nice to know. Um, so we have the two vaccines. They are very similar in the way that they work. Um, Even though I think what a really important thing when you hear about like this vaccine technology is so new, it's really important to know that the technology behind it actually is not new. It's being employed in this particular way in vaccination for the first time now, but it's been in study for over a decade, which is nice. And it's been used in related to cancer treatments successfully in the past. So that's nice to know. I think it's been alarming for a lot of people to see how quickly this came to market, and it's really frustrating for me because it makes me think like what was slowing things down before, right? And so it ends up that what was slowing things down before is a lot of what we see in industry, which is private companies comfort level in assuming risk. So what the government did is tell these private companies like you have no financial risk related to your development of this vaccine. And so they were able to take off all the brakes and just dedicate their resources to study and production and testing of the vaccine. Whereas in normal world, if I'm Pfizer, for example, I'm developing so many pipelines, right? And I'm putting honestly millions and millions of dollars into these pipelines and betting which one is going to work. And I'm not going to put all my production eggs in one basket and then have that trial not go well. Literally, my whole company would tank, right? And so they move very slowly and they dedicate, small funds in very deliberate ways to move things forward. I've had one of the things I love about what I do is you just meet so many different people and chatting about what they do and what their lives are like and whatever. And so Boehringer Ingelheim is a local pharmaceutical company, and I have quite a few patients who work there. And I'm always trying to pick their brains, and they're very secretive about their knowledge and what they can release at certain times because there is private competition related to these companies, right? In the medical world, there's always kind of different silos to get a treatment to market. There's the private silo, there's government funding, and then there's nonprofit sector. And so everybody's constantly doing this research in various silos. So, but these um, these vaccines are really only coming from private sector for-profit companies with this newly found government, support. So, when I'm talking to my patients that work with, Boehringer Ingelheim and such, it's amazing how much money and how many processes have to like be put in place way before they ever know that the vaccine is going to work or a medicine for that matter. So I can think of a couple of engineers that I work with, and they're literally like designing the machine that cuts the pill that's very specific for this. And it's like, well, we hope it gets through phase 3 because I've done all this work and had it, tank before. So that's really how it came to happen so quickly. It's the science really isn't expedited. It's really that the trials were able to enroll super quickly and get their numbers up very quickly because the financial risk was removed from the particular company. So I think that's really reassuring. Um, so not to get too, geeky sciencey, but the mRNA vaccines Like I said, it gives you mRNA. You produce this spike protein, which is fairly novel to COVID-19. And then your body essentially thinks that you've encountered the whole virus and produces an immune response to that spike protein. Now, the spike protein is a good thing to target because it's really the spike protein that is what makes COVID-19 more than just your standard flu or cold or what have you, because that spike protein really has an affinity for different receptors that we haven't seen before. Um, and I don't know about you, but at first glance, when we talk about the effects of COVID-19, you can think, oh my gosh, this thing just does everything. And how does it do this? And it's got respiratory effects and head and neck effects, and then it's affecting the heart too, and then clots and, all these different things that seem disconnected. And I think it just kind of goes to show that sometimes our traditional and allopathic medical model doesn't describe health in the way that it should, because we know that the body is all over, it's one unit. And so we can think about things as a respiratory virus or a GI virus or what have you, but almost every virus affects the whole body. And as an example, this, stubborn spike protein has an affinity to what are called ACE receptors in the body. And ACE receptors are all over the body, but have different like densities or different amounts of ACE receptors in different areas. And lo and behold, those different areas that have ACE receptors are the exact areas that we see affected with COVID-19. So we have the most ACE receptors in the lung. So it affects the lung more than others. We interestingly have ACE receptors in the olfactory centers. So that's the whole thing with the loss of, smell and taste as well. We have ACE receptors in the heart. We have ACE receptors in blood vessels. We have a GI ACE receptor. So it's really a whole body virus, and almost every virus is. But we tend to, depending on how they work, they tend to affect certain systems, more than others. So we have the two vaccines that are out now. Right now, as of this morning, even though we're hearing like so much talk build up related to rollout to the next phase of people, we're still in that 1A phase of vaccinating healthcare workers and long-term care facilities. And as people kind of work through that phase, it should be really any day now that we're able to tell people more about, hey, this is when you'll be able to get the virus, I need to stop saying that. That's a bad substitution. This is when you'll be able to get the vaccine and where. And so right now, the general plan is that the government, so there's a little bit more national coordination of this than we've seen ever, but national coordination, then down to the states. The states have chosen to really target both health care systems, hospital systems, and they've chosen a couple of private entities, CVS and Walgreens, I believe, that are kind of boots on the ground for that phase 1A. Makes sense because healthcare systems can administer the vaccine to their healthcare workers. And then these private entities have kind of taken the charge to go into the long-term care facilities and give the vaccine there. And then, of course, there's the local health department. So many of us don't necessarily have the opportunity to even be familiar with the local health department or what they do every day, but they have been doing vaccination and screening for testing and contact tracing of different things from TB to syphilis to, a lot of different things for decades, centuries probably. And so they will be able to manage this vaccination effort as well. And so what I suspect it will look like is that, everyone will have kind of different paths to obtain a vaccine if they want to. From my personal perspective here locally, in my practice, with these two initial vaccines, because they are pretty stubborn and pretty fragile in their nature. They require really fancy schmancy sub-zero freezers. I won't be stocking those vaccines. And technically, even if I wanted to, I in my sector of the community, you had to commit to, I forget the number, but you had to commit to have the freezer, have the $1 million freezer, and you had to commit to be able to vaccinate a certain, I think it was 2,000 people. And so that's not within my purview, but within my community, I am most closely associated with the Ohio Health System. So I I got my vaccine yesterday through them, and was able to schedule a time, and I'll be able to do that for patients through the Ohio Health System, which is, I think they have about 10 vaccine sites around Central Ohio up and running now. There will also be the health department is getting their systems up and running, and they're vaccinating healthcare workers who may not have an association with a healthcare system. So on your local health department's website, you can submit as a healthcare worker that, hey, I have an interest in getting the vaccine, and then they can schedule you a time. And then I would imagine that as we know more, I would assume that if I'm pretty sure it's CVS and Walgreens, if they got a contract to vaccinate those in the long-term care facilities, and they have the ability to then reach out to the community, then that they'll make availability of the vaccine to the community as well. That makes me a little more, well, I shouldn't say it makes me a little more nervous. Um, Pharmacies have been administering vaccines for a long time, right? And so if they commit to continue very safe procedures and have space to vaccinate people and then monitor them for the appropriate amount of time, I'm sure they will do a great job. So um, and I'll talk a little bit about, if you if you decide to get the vaccine, what's best practice? Like, how can I make sure that this is the safest for me? Um, so those are the two that are rolling out now. There are two more that are close. AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson are two, well-known pharmaceutical companies that have a totally different technology in their vaccine. And so they're actually using a defective adenovirus DNA. So it's DNA from a totally different virus that has been shown to be able to trigger RNA production and then protein production for the body that has cross reactivity with COVID-19. So that technology has been used. That's the same technology that a lot of other vaccines use. It's a little, honestly, less specific. So it's kind of this interesting dichotomy. We have a little bit more maybe suspicion or like anxiety that I'm hearing around new technology of mRNA. But once you kind of prove that RNA technology, and like I said, it's been in development for years and years, it's really cool because it is the most specific that you can get. Like you're not, so again, not to get too sciencey geeky, but DNA always gets transcribed to RNA, and then from RNA that transcribes to protein. And so historically, we've given people either the whole kit and caboodle, the whole virus, like a live virus, and then just a little touch, and then expected your body to create an immune response to that. Or we've given you dead virus, and that but we know that even though the virus is dead, it's not going to replicate, but the body will pick up on it and then create an immune response to that. And so if you were to ever encounter the live virus, your body would have the memory and the knowledge of what it's dealing with, so it could mount a response more quickly, maybe even, and that's how it prevents, hopefully even before you ever notice it. So that's really kind of rewinding like vaccines, how they work, but that's our goal. We'll never be able to prevent encountering the virus, but because it's always this tug of war between, okay, how equipped is my immune system versus how big a dose, how equipped is the virus, which depends on how fancy the virus is and how big a dose we come across. We have this tug of war. So our goal is to give your immune system a head start. Like, hey, you don't have to like look at this new virus and figure out what it is and how you should arm yourself and then produce all the cells to attack it. We can give you a head start by teaching you what it looks like and letting you remember that. So then when you encounter it, all you have to do is create those cells that I told you to create. And the immune system can do that very quickly when you encounter the virus. And most of the time it can do so quickly that you never see the clinical effects of the virus. Or if you do see the clinical effects, they're milder in nature. And that really is the whole purpose of vaccination. It's not, and this can be frustrating, I think, from a patient perspective, because it's in the land of like no guarantees, and you hear this related to the flu shot a lot. It's like, I got that flu shot and I still got the flu. Well, yeah, technically, because our goal for the flu shot for you is that you don't die. And that you don't get in the hospital and you don't get on a vent and you don't get pneumonia and you don't, have all these lingering effects after. Same thing with COVID-19. Our goal for you is that first goal is that you don't die. Second goal is that you don't, have to be on a vent and have a prolonged hospitalization, and that you even don't get severe enough disease that it creates, long-term effects in your respiratory system or cognitive issues, or increases your risk of clots, or decreases your stamina to the point where it's, weeks and months of recovery. But we acknowledge the fact that some people might still get a little sick, but maybe it will just feel like a cold for them, or maybe it will just feel like, kind of on the milder end of the spectrum. So that's our whole goal with the vaccine is, it'd be nice if we can completely eliminate cases, but really our target is to eliminate those severe cases and the cases that cause long-term consequences for people, which is the whole, while we're making such a hoopla of all this, right? It's this is a virus that, for a subset of people, we see that whole spectrum, but for a certain subset of people that is really significant. This is not your standard, hey, I got the flu and I'm sick for a week and I feel better. It is it is causing, such long-term effects that really we're only at the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what those long-term effects can be. So the next two vaccines use a little bit different technology. And there's one that's set for review in February. There's another one that's set for review in April. Those are a little more slow. They got started a little later, but they also are, it took a bit of a pause after their vaccine enrollment to monitor for kind of what we consider out of proportion immune responses. So one of the risks of vaccines that we have to consider is that when we do what we're meaning to do, and we give you whether it's mRNA, live virus, whatever, we give you something that will stimulate your immune system so that your immune system learns what the virus looks like so you can do better if you encounter the virus. We always run the risk that maybe we'll stimulate the immune system too much. And then when you encounter the virus or in response to that vaccine, maybe you'll have a bigger immune response. And but so they're really kind of with this more traditional vaccine, we really need to look for longer to monitor for those hyperimmune responses. The Pfizer and Moderna definitely did the same, monitoring. And now, at least, gosh, I'm trying to think of when their studies closed. I mean, we're now definitely past the point of, that those hyperimmune responses typically happen within the first 4 to 6 weeks after a shot. So we're definitely have a lot of people that have been through the vaccine and been tested, and we're not seeing that. So, um, what else? I guess the only other thing that I wanted to talk about related to the vaccine is maybe best practices if you want to get the vaccine. I think um, the most important thing to doing well when you get a vaccine is honestly your mindset related to it, and so our mindset is the first thing that starts our immune response. And so if you go into a stressful situation, kind of all worked up and then you get a vaccine, like it's that sympathetic stimulation of your nervous system does not bode your immune system well. And we saw this, quite frankly, in some of it's been about a month since the first healthcare workers got their vaccine. And it's an interesting crowd, I tell you, when you are vaccinating the most at risk of the at risk, 9 months, 10 months into a pandemic, you have these stressed, tired, overworked, overwhelmed people going into a vaccine. And quite frankly, I'm in a lot of these physician groups with like thousands and thousands, and it was almost, I don't want to say it was comical, but it was almost comical how many people had like a fainting reaction after after the vaccine. And it's not anything related to the vaccine. A lot of people faint when they get their blood drawn or faint when they get a shot or whatever. And I thought, of all the people that reaction is going to happen to, it would be these stressed out healthcare workers that go in dehydrated and not having eaten and having 10 months of sympathetic overdrive that then all of a sudden is like released in this intense. There's a lot of emotions within the healthcare industry related to the vaccine. Just my sister who got it about a month ago was like, I literally burst into tears after I got it. And I slept so soundly that night. I never knew how stressed I was until like I had that like ounce of hope, and it just so tells us, how much our emotions and are related to our autonomic nervous system. So don't go in one of those people who is dehydrated, hasn't eaten, all worked up, and then faints because you got a shot. That is my first set of tips. And then the other thing that I think is really important, especially if we get into, maybe you're getting your vaccine at a Kroger or, a CVS, is it's really important to wait a full 30 minutes after you get the vaccine. There is a small chance of an allergic reaction, just like you would have with, any medication. And so, there's a definite screening protocol for anyone who has a history of intense allergic reaction, anaphylaxis, who carries an EpiPen, may or may not be the best option for you, depending on your personal situation. But for everyone, because we can't really get a true picture for the incidence of allergic reaction. We know we've seen some very, very small number. It's just important that not, drive yourself home after 10 minutes and then you're having an allergic reaction in the car. An allergic reaction can be very safely, treated when you're in a healthcare setting. So, and I think, sometimes we tend to think like, oh, it's been 10 minutes, I can go. But if you're going to have an allergic reaction, it really very well might happen in that like 15 to 25-minute range after your shot. So just bring your iPod. That dates me. I meant to say AirPods. Um, bring a book or bring your headphones so that you can chill out wherever you are and plan to be monitored for 30 minutes after. And then from a side effect perspective, with the vaccine, one of there some people do have side effects with it. There's just no like beating around the bush with that. I usually tell patients that, I always remember kind of the childhood vaccination series. What do we tell people about babies after their shots? They may be a little fussy. They may run a little low-grade fever. They may be a little achy. And so that's exactly what we see with every vaccine. And we definitely are seeing it with this one. The job of any vaccine is to stimulate an immune response. It's not to make you sick. It doesn't make you sick. It's a fooler, like I said earlier. And so symptoms of an immune response can be that you feel a little more tired, that mild headache, achiness, maybe a low-grade fever. But even those are in the rarer category. The most common by far is just that injection site soreness. And they have to inject it into the muscle. So your whole deltoid will be sore. And, I was talking to my sister this morning because, like I said, I got mine yesterday. And I was like, by the afternoon, I was working. I was like, gosh, I didn't think that I worked out that hard the day before, but I'm getting kind of sore. This is my thought process. I'll let you know that I have a little bit of a blonde side, but I'm a little sore. And then I was like, oh, no, it's just sore on the one side. I can't even give myself credit for working out hard. It's just the shot. So at first I thought I really had a good workout, but nope, it's just the shot. So, and it was enough for me to take an Aleve for, just because, I'm aware of it there. A lot of people have the most experience with a tetanus shot. Like it's pretty sore muscle. And so I think you can expect the same, with this vaccine. So hydrate, is key, that before you go and the day of the shot. Getting some movement just to get that blood pumping. My nurse, Andrea, actually has a tip for patients of, you may want to get it actually in your dominant hand. Our thought process is like, oh, I'm right-handed, so let me get it in the left side so it doesn't hurt as much. But honestly, if you're working, if you're moving that area, the blood's pumping, you can kind of work through that soreness a little more. And that can be helpful. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that anyone take anything proactively, like a Tylenol or a Motrin, to prevent soreness, but you don't have to torture yourself. If it's uncomfortable, you can, definitely treat it. And so all of that can be helpful to kind of ease the period afterwards. From a integrative medicine perspective, natural anti-inflammatories are wonderful and key. Just upping the fruits and vegetables, fish oil, turmeric, vitamin C, like those are all immune beneficial and can probably help in the days after getting a vaccine, just like they can help if you are ill. I did want to also put in a little bit of a reminder, because we're talking a lot about the vaccine, but I'm still every day talking with people who have come in contact with the virus or having suspicious symptoms of the virus, being diagnosed with the virus, there is a lot that we can be doing both proactively and in home care related to um, our immune system and dealing with the virus in the best way possible. A lot of them fall in the very simple but easier said than done category. Probably the number one would be sleep. The number two would be hydration. And then the number three being like all the fruits and vegetables, probably a little extra, vitamin C, zinc, that kind of stuff. If you have not, if you're on this call, I assume you get my emails, and I think it's probably been since July, but March and July, I sent out a PDF that I called like the tip sheet. And that really goes through a lot of those self-care things that you can do at home. From the time, of course, we don't have study on this. I feel like I need to put a little disclaimer, but just knowing the physiology behind it, from the time of exposure to the time that you develop symptoms, which can be a good 48 hours, that you don't really know, or you may not know. You may know you were exposed, maybe you don't right away, is so crucial in how your body will fight off the virus. And so, like I said, there's that initial tug of war where it's a battle between how well is my immune system working and how sneaky is this virus, and what kind of dose of virus was I exposed to. And then in those beginning hours to days, that's when you really face off. And so because we never really know when we're going to be exposed, it's important for us to be doing all those things, or every day. But certainly if you find out that you've been exposed, all the way up through like early mild symptoms time, that's really a time to kick up the hydration, kick up the rest, kick up the vitamin D, fish oil, vitamin C, zinc, all these things that we know can help early immune response. And I put all of that in that PDF. So that is, I think I'm going to write my website in the chat, but it's also housed at drpage.com/tips. So if you can't put your hand on it, you can re-download it from there. So, what else? What questions do we have? John had to go, but he put in the chat, my wife got the vaccine on Monday, no problems yet. Other than the CDC site, they tell you to register after you get the vaccine. Doesn't work. Oh, that's unfortunate. I was able to get that site to work, but the CDC has it's an app and it's called vSafe. And so it's nice because if you have side effects that you suspect are related to the vaccine, you can report them directly to the CDC. So essentially you are contributing to the ongoing study of vaccine safety by doing that. And the way they have it set up, it's you register and then they just send you a reminder text every day in order to in order to report your vaccines. Can someone, well, let me see. Let's see if this website works. I spelled my own name wrong. Go figure. Aurel, that's a good question. Who should not get the vaccine? I think if I think top down, vaccine components really don't have any like common components that we know, hey, if you're allergic to, like in the flu shot, eggs, or, other things. So there's nothing there, but the people that may want to think twice about getting a vaccine are that subgroup of people who have a lot of immune dysfunction that has resulted in anaphylaxis for them. And it's not that we know, hey, this is going to cause that, but if we know you have kind of that tendency towards a hyperactive immune system, you will want to weigh that into account related to your risk of vaccination or your risk of exposure and your risk of having a tough time with the vaccine, to make that judge. So there are really no absolute contraindications unless you've already gotten the shot and had an allergic reaction to it. But that group of people should probably think twice. And then there's a big group of people that, are a little more unknown because they didn't have the representation in the studies for us to have the level of confidence that we have with others. And so pregnant, breastfeeding, moms and kids are the big categories that we really can say we haven't really tracked study related to that. And it's that timeline is just a little bit behind the the curve. Now, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists has, put out a recommendation that all breastfeeding and pregnant moms should be offered the vaccine. Absolutely, because we do know that they're at higher risk of having downsides to getting COVID. But understandably, there's a little more of an unknown in those circumstances. So I totally support people getting the vaccine in those groups. Well, right now it's not offered to kids, but pregnant and breastfeeding moms can get it. Um, but I'm understanding certainly of the of the hesitancy. Physiologically, we can have the same confidence as we have with the flu shot or other vaccines that we know are given in pregnancy. So I think a lot of people are doing well doing getting the shot. Um, let's see. What else did I want to mention? Or what questions do you all have related to COVID or the vaccine or anything else? Oh, I know one other thing that I wanted to mention. Um, there's some question about, or just wanted to give an update related to treatment of COVID and how people are doing. And in my practice, I have a small subset of people, of course, but in my practice, we're still seeing kind of um, the spectrum, people that happen to be tested maybe because of an exposure, or some employers are testing proactively that have no symptoms and are blown away that they test positive. And then some people who I would say if we think about a bell curve, that bell curve is probably around people that have a known exposure or not. I definitely have had a lot of cases where it's like looking back, hindsight 2020, right? They know, oh, either they were told that that person was positive, or, oh, I remember that person was coughing their head off or, had symptoms. And in hindsight, I wish I never was around them, but it happened. And so we move forward. But so whether they know of an exposure or not, have this little prodrome of maybe like a day or two of what, quite frankly, we all would probably write off as, oh, it's kind of weird. It's kind of allergies. Maybe it's a cold coming on, and it's the maybe itchy, watery, runny nose, scratchy throat, headache, feeling tired. Oh, maybe I didn't sleep well. That's probably it. Our mind tries to reconcile these things and like make reasons for them. So we just really have to have our antenna up, I think, related to COVID. And this is a lesson learned, for eternity, right? Like, we need to be conscious of how we're feeling. And if we're having infectious symptoms, really have a short threshold, a low threshold to not be around other people. And so there are times where I, over the past few months, have called people and said, you know what? Let's do a Zoom meeting instead of in person because I'm having some symptoms that I wouldn't want to expose you to. for 15 years, I would have been in this office exposing y'all to that, quite frankly. You know, like I would have, oh, it's just a cold. I'll wash my hands. I'm not going to cough on people, you know, but we have just learned a greater sense of, you know, responsibility with this virus that in the early days can look like any other virus. So a little bit of a prodrome, couple days, and then usually it kind of declares itself from there with, you know, maybe more chest, maybe more shortness of breath, development of a fever, and yada, yada. And then on the other end of the spectrum is almost more of a flu-ish thing where you feel like you got hit by a truck, you know, and it's really, I woke up, achy, headache, coughing, short of breath, fever all at once, you know. And so there's really that spectrum. And accordingly, there's a spectrum of treatment, you know, like I mentioned before, early on, especially just really being very aggressive about self-care, which sounds intuitive and sounds simple, but is so hard to do when you're sick, right? You just want to curl up in a ball and just pretend it's not there and hope for the best. And maybe I'll just wake up perfect, you know, but it's like, no, you really have to get your water bottle, make yourself drink, make yourself move every hour, get up and around, keep the blood pumping, take really big deep breaths, stay on Mucinex or something to, you know, keep things thin, take your supplements to, you know, help inflammation and help the immune system, and be really aggressive early on. And then as people progress, and what we've been doing honestly is like, I hope you never encounter this, you know, those that are patients, but you know, if we know you're sick, we're calling you every day to just to see how you're doing. And then as things progress, you know, sometimes we're adding an inhaler or making sure you have a pulse oximeter at your house so that you can measure oxygen levels, and we're increasing the fluids and maybe adding, ironically, an antibiotic, which we try not to overuse, but in this case, we know we're kind of using it more for anti-inflammatory purposes than we are for antibacteria purposes, and it has proven to be helpful. Sometimes, as if things progress, we're adding steroids, which we have to be very cautious in using early on, but have been proven very beneficial in the later stages to decrease inflammation so that your body doesn't become overwhelmed with the inflammation. And so by far, well, day 10 has become a little notorious with this virus. You know, if you haven't cleared it by day 10, we're a little more worried about that inflammation just revving up and coming on. Within the first 7 days, with more severe symptoms, we have the option to recommend, even as an outpatient, monoclonal antibody treatments where they're actually giving you antibodies to help you fight. Other than that, you know, we're using kind of all the medicines and self-care and supplements that I mentioned. And then within the hospital setting, if the inflammation has gotten to such that your oxygen level is kind of starting to go down, or you are, you know, having trouble staying hydrated, then the hospital setting can be very supportive to increase hydration, do IV antibiotics, do IV antiviral treatments. And then there are a lot of medicines in study that are being used in the hospital setting that that really have increased the success of hospital treatment a lot. So I know the fear is there. And when I'm talking to people about like, okay, it's time to go to the hospital, it's like, no, I don't want to go. And that's, you know, understandable, of course. But I think there's just so many more treatments now that we know, compared to March, where hospitalization does not mean, oh my gosh, I'm going to end up on a ventilator, and, you know, some of the tragic things that you hear about. Um, and they're, one, because of the treatments, and then what we know about preventing some of the complications, like blood thinners, for example, to prevent clots. So So I feel like I've n- gotten real scientific today. You have now a immunology degree on COVID and the vaccine and all of that. I wish I had more updates related to actually getting the vaccine. You know, the next phase will be for those elderly with those with chronic health conditions, and so that's a big group of people um, that should be starting any day. I have a lot of confidence, quite honestly, that I think it's easy to feel like, oh my gosh, I have to scramble for my vaccine. I don't think we're in that situation. We're not going to be out of this tomorrow. Even if everybody was, vaccinated, it takes time to kind of reach that level of protection. Um, I've heard the number thrown around that technically to reach herd immunity, we're looking for 240 million vaccinations. Um, and the goal is to have 100 million vaccinations in the next 100 days. So, that's three, over 3 months' time to get not even halfway to herd immunity. Now that the big disclaimer that totally um, doesn't necessarily count even the people that have had it that we haven't been able to track and all of that. But I think the reason I bring that up is that vaccine shortages, like someone who wants to get a vaccine and can't find it anywhere, I don't I don't have a level of concern for that right now. So that's really, really reassuring. So, thoughts, questions? I will keep everyone up to date on vaccine rollout. I think the big unknowns obviously are like, how long does this last, right? So I hesitate to, I'm not a betting woman and I hesitate to put, eggs in a basket, but just knowing the nature of the virus and such, I venture to say this isn't one of those like one and done type things. And even though we know from everything we can tell right now that this vaccination seems to be covering the various strains that are going around, will we be in a situation where every so often we need to adjust the vaccine to cover the most virulent, dangerous strains, kind of like we do for the flu shot? I kind of think we will. I don't know. What time is it? Let's mark it down, see if I'm right. I kind of think this will be a little bit like the flu shot in the coming years where we might need to be updated. So we shall see. But
I'm not sure what your timeline is for ending this meeting if you have something to be added to, but I think Emily had one question in the chat and then I have a question afterwards if you still have time.
yeah, I have until 1 or 2:15, so we're good. How about quarantine/self quarantine guidelines, and do we think they will change with the shot? That is a really good question. And just socially, how the vaccine will change our lives is intriguing to me. I've already gotten, some texts from my girlfriend who's a family doc, and we got our vaccine the same day. And I haven't seen her except for like an outdoor quick masked hug at Christmas since March, right? And she's like, I have full immunity on February 16th. That's my birthday. Where are we going, But the reality is we don't know. The unfortunate thing is we don't know how the vaccine will affect asymptomatic spread and like uh, mild disease. So we're always going to, in these next few months, even be very cautious of like, okay, what are the numbers looking like? Who in my life has been vaccinated? Who hasn't? And are they at high risk or not? You know? So even if I have the vaccine, if my elderly, loved one has not, how's that gonna influence our interactions? I saw a little quip online about, the new the new picture for the dating websites is gonna be like me getting my vaccine. Like that's very attractive on Match.com. Are you vaccinated or are you not? So, when it comes to planning kids' parties and different things, it will be interesting to navigate this, right? So, the recommendations for right now and in the near future, I've been telling people like just hang in there till March and April because things will start loosening up both because of the vaccine, but also just because of kind of the natural numbers dying down when people can get out and about more and see the benefit of, people kind of being more cautious. Um, but the recommendations won't change in the next few months as far as be attentive to who you're around, be masked with anyone who is not like in your pod, out in public and things. We won't see big potential like super spreader big events happen in the next few months. But I think we'll have more reassurance related to expanding our pods is what I think will happen, and hopefully we'll have a lot more education related to even little things like hand washing and keeping your distance in public, mask or no mask, keeping your distance in public from people you don't know. um, if you're sick, don't go to work, that kind of thing. So we'll continue to kind of think in two avenues. What's our personal level of comfort of exposing ourselves and our loved ones, and then what's our social responsibility for how we act in public. So what's on your mind, Erica?
So I just found out like through actually some of the OU medical students that the public health, Columbus Public Health is vaccinating like various medical professionals that are not in hospital systems, and you can sign up online. And I just was curious about your opinion. I just started working in an acupuncture clinic, and we do have about 10 different clinicians, and we have a lot of patients every day. And two of our clinicians have gotten COVID, and they're very young, and they just, were out for a couple of weeks, and they now they're back. But do you think I would count as part of non-hospital healthcare workers, like clinical workers? I just don't want to take a vaccine from somebody that really needs it more than me, but I am interested in getting vaccinated. And I looked at the categories, and that was the one that I feel like I fit into, but I
Yeah.
don't want to, I just don't want to take it away from someone that needs it more than me.
Yeah, totally understandable. And I think you're thinking about, all the right considerations. I lean toward yes, absolutely. And I think we've seen precedent for that. When we think about healthcare workers, yes, the front lines, ICU, um, urgent cares, ERs, like they're kind of that first tier, even the tier within a tier, right, of healthcare workers. But now, as we expand out to other healthcare providers, um, acupuncturists are providing healthcare for people every single day related to just a multitude of things from mood to pain to energy and such. And so, for sure. For sure, for sure.
Thank you.
Yes. I don't know what my endorsement will.
No, it's okay. I've just been kind of struggling with it because I've been watching like, the chats of the students, and they're like, we want to get it. Here's how to do it. And information's flying back and forth. And I
Yeah,
think I want to go get it. And but I feel like there's,
yeah,
they need it more than I do.
Yeah.
because they see more people, they're in a hospital. But but there's a category for non-hospital, clinical healthcare workers, and feel like
Yeah. And
I
so
feel
when
like if I sign up, Columbus would be able to probably tell me, no, you don't count, come back later. So,
yeah. And it kind of, I think it just, what, if I put myself in your shoes, what you're struggling with is like, okay, that line between the role of integrative healthcare versus the traditional medical model. And in reality, in an approach, whether you're an integrative approach to anything, whether it's a cold or back pain or mood, is very, it's valid healthcare, And so just because someone's not seeking like an allopathic model and they're choosing to go to an acupuncturist, or they're choosing to go to a naturopath, or they're choosing to go to a chiropractor to, address even communicable symptoms through their structural health. We know that connection is there, so I think that's what it's there for,
okay,
especially knowing that the supply is there. It's just a matter of, rolling it out.
right. Thank you. I appreciate your opinion. So,
Yep.
and thanks for all this great info. I really, I feel there's so much information out there and there's so many sources in it. It can I can get overwhelmed sometimes just looking from website to website, and I appreciate you kind of consolidating it to just give us some good real info.
Yep. I am happy to do that. And I will send, I did record this session, which I don't typically do, but I'll send out a link by email so that, um, people can pass it along, to anyone who might find it helpful too. So, alrighty, my people, well, it's been fun. I'll see you in February. And keep an eye out for your email. Before February, we'll know a lot more. And if we need to jump back on and answer questions, we can. But I'll certainly send out some updates by email every week, before then. So thank you.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.